This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone, I think we may just be onto something here with this theory. One Piece has been a beloved story in pop culture for over 2 decades. From its humble opening chapters to the cataclysmic clashes of the modern material, the series has become the single best-selling manga of all time, and Eiichiro Oda, the cheeky monkey, has been peppering this story with intrigue and smoking guns from the very beginning, begging for us, the fans of the series, to speculate and try to solve his magnum opus's greatest mysteries, like, when will we see the One Piece treasure, or how will this story end? But what if I told you we might actually have the answers? Every volume of the One Piece manga after Volume 4 features a Question Corner, or SBS, where author Eiichiro Oda takes the time to answer fans' questions and reveals more intricacies of the world and characters he's created. Oda's answers are usually both comedic and detailed in nature, ranging from categorical information regarding age and measurements to playful banter with fans. But in Volume 42, which was released in 2006, just 9 years into publication, Oda received a different sort of question. One far more loaded than any he had previously received. It asks simply whether Oda had thought of bringing the series to an end. His response was as follows. I answered this question during some interview, but One Piece was originally supposed to be a 5-year story. I've always had the last chapter in my mind, but it's taken longer than 5 years to build up the storyline. And so, the pirates have been on a 9-year adventure, and I don't know how much longer it will take. Nearly 14 years have passed since that response, and as One Piece finally reaches and passes the long-awaited chapter 1000, the question still remains. How and when will the series actually end? It's a question that has lingered in the back of fans' minds for decades, and one that somehow gets harder and harder to answer as we close in on that ultimate goal. Oda himself has recently stated that he believes the series will end in the next 5 years, and that statement has been met with a healthy dose of skepticism from the One Piece fanbase. But what if it's an accurate estimate? What if all the series' secrets will be revealed in the next 5 years? But more specifically, what if I told you that the One Piece fanbase has had the secret to figuring out what the end of the series entails at their fingertips this entire time? What if we already know what the final chapter will look like, just like Oda himself? Welcome to the video, everyone. I'm totally not Mark, and today I'm taking my deepest dive yet into the structure of the expansive One Piece series, attempting to unravel its secrets and hopefully to reveal the narrative flow for the end of one of the greatest stories ever told. This is the Checkered Fate Theory, how One Piece will end. But first, a warning. This theory has already proven effective in privately predicting a few recent events among my friend group, and some fans might not want future plot details spoiled in any way, shape, or form, and that includes anime watchers. I mean, we'll be touching on Wano's current developments as well, so to those of you that wish to remain blind to the structure of this series proper, please turn back now, or use the time codes down below appropriately. Now, to business. As it currently stands, One Piece can be divided into 3 major canonical sections: the East Blue, Paradise, and the New World. Our theory is actually super simple, but has a tremendous amount of detail. So, to put it as simply as possible, we posit that the New World arcs are perfect thematic inversions or mirrors of the Paradise arcs. And assuming our theory concerning that portion of the story is correct, we can then look at those East Blue arcs and try to pinpoint the answers to what lies ahead of us at the end of the series. And let me tell you, one thing that we're convinced is for certain: these inversions are not only pervasive throughout the canon of the story, but they're intentional, used primarily to signify a progression in underlying themes and showcase the growth of the Straw Hats over their 2-year time skip. From would-be greenhorn newbie wayfarers in way over their heads during the Paradise material, to the intimidating and world-renowned pirates they are today voyaging across the New World. But before we delve too deep into these details, some fans might be confused by the terms East Blue, Paradise, and New World. If you know what these terms are, you can again use the time codes below to skip to the next section of the video. I'm sure all of you who even have a passing interest in this series will recognize at least some of these locations. This is the East Blue, the introductory portion of the story where Luffy recruits Zoro, Nami, Usopp, and Sanji. Paradise is a term only ever utilized twice throughout the series, and it specifically refers to the first half of the Grand Line. In Volume 8, Chapter 69, after defeating Don Krieg, saving the Baratie, and recruiting Sanji, Luffy says that he declines to take Zeph's logbook, which detailed the former pirate's journey through the Grand Line. Luffy preferred the sense of adventure and wanted to find out what it was like on his own, but Zeph gave one hint before he left. He said, "For some, the Grand Line is paradise. And finally, after the time skip, the Straw Hats remain in paradise for both the return to Sabaody and the trip to Fishman Island before officially entering the New World. The New World arcs as we currently know them are as follows. There's fewer here, sure, but they're all lengthy, massive arcs in their own right, with some spanning more than 100 chapters. And as of writing this video, we are knee-deep in the Wano material. Now, there is some confusion as to whether or not Fishman Island should be considered part of paradise or the New World, seeing as it's sort of underwater and in the middle. So for the time being, we'll leave both it and the Return to Sabaody arc in their own separate categories. But don't worry, we will address both in due time. So let's dive into this theory and walk down memory lane through some of the most iconic moments from the series to demonstrate the inversions between paradise and the New World arcs. And perhaps once we've understood how Oda does this, we might be able to use that information to map out and predict future events and maybe even the story's ending. Cool? Cool. And so, on this quest for answers, let's start where we currently are in canon and work backwards towards the beginning. We're starting with Wano, and more specifically, Act 3. Longtime fans of the series might know that Wano has been in Oda's head for a long time. Perhaps not necessarily by name, but the island itself definitely existed somewhere in his head. The origin of Sea Prism Stone was first teased all the way back during Alabasta, when Smoker, Luffy, Zoro, Nami, and Usopp were all caged by Crocodile. Smoker said at the time that the tip of his primary weapon was made of Sea Prism Stone, which could only be found in one place in the ocean. That, we now know, is Wano. We know that the stone's origin was always supposed to be Wano because Smoker's weapon is a jute, which is a specialized weapon used by the police in the Edo period of Japan. Such careful thinking proves that Wano always had a special place in canon, which is fitting as Wano just happens to be an inversion of the biggest climax in the series so far, Marineford. Spoiler warning, the following short section examines portions of the manga that, as of writing this video, have not yet been adapted into the anime yet. So if you're an anime only and wish to stay that way, you can use the timecodes below to skip to the anime-friendly material. It's no secret that Oda has hyped up the Wano raid to be a Marineford level event, but what happens if we directly compare locations? Let's start with Onigashima. Does its structure look familiar? I mean, it should. It's nearly identical in structure to Marineford itself, with a circular ocean inlet positioned directly in front of a main building. But these are just visual similarities. To understand how these two arcs are mirror images of one another, we have to compare both inversions. On Onigashima, the pirates snuck in through the main entrance, relatively undetected, and sunk their ships down to the bottom of the ocean because they knew there'd be no going back. In Marineford, however, the Marines were 100% prepared for the arriving pirates and were still caught off guard by Whitebeard's ships that came up out of the water, right in the same relative location where the samurai sunk their ships respectively. Furthermore, the raid on Onigashima is a private affair, happening on an isolated island, while the battle for Marineford was a public one and broadcast to the whole world. The purpose of both battles is also relatively similar, to save an heir. In Marineford, the figure is Ace, who happens to be the blood son of Gold D. Roger and the metaphorical son of the Emperor Whitebeard. In Onigashima, thematically speaking, Luffy is saving two heirs, who represent both halves of Ace's identity, Momonosuke and Yamato. First, we'll start with Momo. The rightful heir to the Wano shogunate, he was thrust 20 years into the future by his mother, Toki. And if you remember, Ace was held in his mother, Rouge's womb, not for 20 years, but for 20 months, physically sending him into the future. He also happens to be 20 years old during Marineford. And what's more is both Momo and Ace are put on display for execution, which was where Ace's true parentage was revealed, and he hides from that identity as long as he can. On the other hand, Momo doesn't shy away from his heritage and proudly declares who he is in that moment. The other half of Ace is Yamato, Kaido's son by blood. While Ace is loyal and protective of his adopted father, Whitebeard, and Yamato wants to break their chains and end their relationship with Kaido. Luffy frees both by removing their handcuffs, and the resultant poses after the explosion are eerily similar. And speaking of Kaido, Kaido is a total and complete inversion of Whitebeard. Both are introduced into the series as, quote, the strongest. Kaido is obsessed with strength and death, finding new ways to attempt suicide suicide to leave a lasting legacy rather than truly caring about his subordinates. Whitebeard values life on the other hand, and his crew above all else. This is shown through their actions on the battlefield as well, more specifically in their endings. Whitebeard holds a grudge against Blackbeard, who gangs up with his 9 other crewmates to kill the Emperor. A tragic end to an amazing man's life. Kaido's fight on Onigashima begins because of Oden's 20-year grudge. A man who lives on in the spirit of his 9 retainers who all gang up on the Emperor to catch him off guard. But the biggest hint towards a larger inversion comes from Oden's flashback at the start of Act 3. In more ways than one, Oden, Whitebeard, and Roger are metaphorical inversions of Sabo, Ace, and Luffy. Oden and Sabo are both royalty and run away from home, but Oden's family disowns him, allowing him to travel into the ugliest part of the country until he returns as a man revered by all. He eventually gets to live his dream and travel the world as a pirate. Meanwhile, Sabo's family does not disown him at all. The better part of his young life is spent hiding from his heritage while his parents bring in Stelly as a replacement. Stelly, by the way, is a complete inversion of Orochi, both of whom come to power in completely different ways within the royal structure. But unlike Oden, Sabo doesn't get to travel the world, at least in the flashback. He is killed by a celestial dragon using a gun. Oden is also killed by a dragon, Kaido, using a handgun. By the time Roger arrived, Oden had already developed a brotherly bond with Whitebeard, much the same way Sabo and Ace already had a relationship before Luffy was thrust upon them. But Luffy was the weakest of the 3 and whined all the time, as opposed to Roger's incredible strength and charisma. It's also important to note that Oden's flashback tells the end of Roger's journey, while the ASL flashback details the start of Luffy's. And there are a multitude of visual inversions throughout, but the most obvious comes when Luffy and Roger both declare their dreams in front of the other 2. The bandages are exactly the same as their counterparts, but Whitebeard and Oden's reactions are inversions of Ace and Sabo's. And one last note, Oden's flashback happens at the beginning of Act 3 before the main battle, while ASL happens after Marineford's climax. And so, well, if Act 3 is Marineford, then Act 2 must be...
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
After losing his first battle with Kaido, Luffy is captured and imprisoned in Udon against his will. And while presented with the opportunity, he chooses not to escape and instead takes over the prison himself. In Impel Down, Luffy breaks into an inescapable prison, gets captured, gains allies, and leaves before getting captured again. Magellan is the warden of Impel Down. He has eaten the poison fruit, and Luffy cannot physically touch him without suffering significant damage. Magellan's final poison eats through everything and is essentially instant death, forcing Luffy to run away as fast as he can. Back in Udon, the de facto ruler is Queen, a man famous for creating plagues. One of his viruses, called Mummy, is the biggest obstacle Luffy faces at the end of Act 2. Rather than opting to run away from the highly contagious plague, Luffy stands firm and weathers the effects in order to inspire the prisoners to rise up and rebel. His speech in Udon is also a complete inversion of his being on death's door in Impel Down, where Bon Clay and the rest of level 5.5 cheer him on to stay alive through his first near-fatal encounter with Magellan. Now, one of the cornerstones to Impel Down's plot has to be the presence of Blackbeard and the effects he had on the facility, and his counterpart in Wano's second act is... Big Mom. How do these relate to each other? Well, each has a previously established relationship with the main emperor of the arc. Blackbeard was Whitebeard's crewmate, Big Mom was Kaido's. They each break into the main prison, but the difference is one of identity. Blackbeard broke into Impel Down because of his connections to the world government as a warlord, and Big Mom broke in while dealing with amnesia. She had no idea who she even was. Luffy is also responsible for finding living legends within the prison. Ivankov in Impel Down and Hyogoro in Udon. Iva is leading a resistance underground, while Hyogoro has practically given up on life out in the open. Each arc also features an imprisoned fishman who becomes a valuable ally, Jinbei and Kawamatsu. Just two of the many parallels between Luffy's gathered allies, by the way. Furthermore, there's a moment late in Impel Down where everyone frantically rushes to the exit, only to find no ships present to help them escape. Jinbei has to jump onto the ocean and carry a party with him to capture one of the fleeing ships. This is inverted by the promised port that starts in Act 3. The Scabbards' planned gathering at Tokage Port has gone awry, with every sign of their organized fleet destroyed. Later, it is revealed that all of the ships are okay, including Luffy and his allies, and they set sail where they meet the familiar face, Jinbei. Now, there's a reason why these inversions are so difficult to notice outright. The majority of the story elements from Impel Down have been blended together throughout Wano's arc. For instance, the Great Prison's structure is inverted by the order of the floors on Kaido's mansion. One goes up and the other goes down. The theme of each of the Impel Down floors actually appears in different locations throughout Wano also. The first floor of Impel Down features hundreds of knives that slash prisoners until death. In Wano, the slasher Kamazo is the first true threat to the populace. The second floor of Impel Down is Beast Hell, which might as well be a stand-in for Kaido's army. Level 3, Starvation Hell, is represented by the townsfolk of Wano who are being starved thanks to Orochi's gluttony. Level 4, the Blazing Hell, is present in name thanks to Queen Sumo's Inferno, but also by Lord Odin's boiling death scene, which is a clear callback to the cauldron at the bottom of the level. Level 5, the Freezing Hell, is a manga spoiler, and I won't spoil it here, but it shouldn't be too hard for you all to find if you have read it. And finally, Level 6, Eternal Hell, is inverted by Ringo's burial grounds. For more context there, the prisoners on Level 6 are being erased from history, while Ringo's has what are known as eternal graves, where swords are used as grave markers to honor their former masters' lives. Moving on, it's time for Act 1.
Oh my god. Are you naked?
Luffy washes up on the shores of both islands alone, needing to find his friends. On Amazon Lily, that's his driving purpose. He fears the worst may have just happened to his crew. On Wano, however, he assumes his friends can handle themselves. Additionally, on Amazon Lily, Luffy learns that his brother Ace has been captured, and it completely changes his thought process. In Act 1, Luffy delivers the news of Ace's death to a local girl, Tama, who had a close connection with Ace. In each of these, Luffy clashes with the island's culture. On Amazon Lily, his ignorance of Haki is nearly his downfall, but through sheer force of will, Luffy survives and gains valuable allies. In Wano, Luffy learns firsthand his Haki isn't good enough in a direct confrontation with Kaido, and he loses in a brutal fashion. Well, that takes care of Wano, and so next up is the Reverie, as it inverts some elements from Sabaody. World leaders, including many of the Straw Hats' allies, come together to discuss important matters and realize the impact that Luffy has had on a global stage. In Sabaody, the opposite is true. Luffy reaches a whole new understanding and appreciation for how vast and powerful the rest of the world truly is, and it tears his crew apart. Celestial Dragon San Carlos tries to capture a mermaid in both arcs and is attacked in equal measure for doing so. In Sabaody, Luffy punches him and causes a war to break out on the island, while in Reverie, his defeat actually prevents further violence. Additionally, Sabaody also reveals that the world government has called the remaining members of the 7 warlords together to face Whitebeard at Marineford. Reverie, on the other hand, is actually responsible for disbanding the 7 warlords altogether. And last but not least, Reverie ends with a mystery. Who is Imu, the puppet master pulling the strings behind the world government? Only their right eye is shown, and at the start of Sabaody, Luffy and company run into the Flying Fish Riders, who have a mysterious leader also in Duval. His true identity is left hidden underneath his helmet at first, with only his right eye visible. Next up, Whole Cake Island. Due to its massive size and depth of content, it should come as no surprise that Whole Cake Island's structure is a smash cut of more than one arc this time. Specifically, Water 7, Enies Lobby, and Thriller Bark. Multiple arcs from Paradise providing material for those New World arcs will become much more commonplace from here on out. What can I say? Arcs are longer in the New World. Water 7 is responsible for 2 of the biggest emotional gut punches in the series, Robin and Usopp leaving the crew. Whole Cake Island chooses to merge their 2 plotlines together in Sanji's decision to leave, however. Robin leaves and helps a secret government agency of highly trained assassins target one of Water 7's leaders, not just because of her past, but ultimately to help save the Straw Hat crew from annihilation. She did not believe Luffy and company could defy the world government for her sake. In Sanji's case, he was born into a famous cybernetically crafted kingdom of super soldiers that eventually falls out of favor with the world government. They threaten to destroy his cooking skills and kill his adoptive extended family, Zeph and the crew at the Baratie, if he does not follow through with their arranged wedding plans. Also, visually, Germa 66, or G66, is an inversion of Cypher Pole number 9, or CP9. But Sanji never manages to force Luffy into accepting his departure, however. Unlike Robin, he has a direct one-on-one confrontation with his captain, a duel similar to that of Luffy's duel with Usopp. Sanji claims that he has everything he ever wants and calls Luffy a miserable, inferior pirate. He's attempting to discard the Straw Hats in a similar fashion to how Usopp felt the crew was discarding the Merry for a new ship. And unlike the duel with Usopp, Luffy never retaliates. He allows Sanji to kick him over and over until he collapses, bloodied on the floor. As each duel ends, the physical victor, Luffy in Water 7 and Sanji in Whole Cake Island, is left crying. Usopp leaves after losing to Luffy, Sanji leaves after defeating Luffy. And ultimately, when Robin and Sanji finally both break down and admit their true feelings, the circumstances are also entirely different. Robin is the one who repents after verbally admonishing Luffy and the crew for coming to Enies lobby, declaring to the entire island, "I want to live, take me out to sea with you." But in Whole Cake Island, Luffy physically punches Sanji, forcing him to come to his senses and declare in a private setting, "I want to return to the Sunny." One of the most interesting aspects we noticed of Whole Cake Island's inversions came in the form of the arc skipping the individual fights of Enies lobby in favor of highlighting Luffy's one-on-one battle with Katakuri. The easy parallel being, of course, Luffy versus Lucci. Both fights center around the concept of protecting the Straw Hat crew, one as they frantically try to rescue Robin and the other as they frantically try to leave Toto Land. In order to better combat Lucci, Luffy had to teach himself Gear 2 and 3, leveling the playing field between him and CP9. But in combat with Katakuri, Luffy realizes he's outmatched and forces himself to elevate his haki throughout the course of battle. His challenge is to achieve this elevation in ability while participating within the constraints of the battle itself. What's interesting, however, is that Katakuri quickly dispatches the techniques Luffy used to defeat Lucci with, which raises the question, where does the rest of the fight draw its inspiration from? The answer? It might surprise you. It comes from Ryuma's battles on Thriller Bark. Just on a visual level, both Katakuri and Ryuma are the most reliable underlings of both arcs, and both wear scarves. Ryuma's fight with Brook showed that even if both characters know the exact same moves, power determines the winner of the battle. The exact same lesson Katakuri tries to beat into Luffy. Ryuma's battle with Zoro is also a key piece here. We see the end result of the fight before we flash back to see how it progressed. As an audience, we literally see the future, and the entirety of Luffy vs Katakuri is about the Straw Hat captain training his observation haki to see into the future himself. Zoro and Ryuma's final clash shows the moments just after the final blow has been landed, while Luffy vs Katakuri features a simultaneous exchange that shows the moments just before each move lands. And last but not least, the ending poses of each fight are eerily similar also here. Ryuma and Katakuri each stand tall with Luffy and Zoro lying on the ground in seeming defeat. Both antagonists then concede, each having gained mutual respect for the other fighter. Finally, on the topic of Whole Cake Island, one of the most important thematic inversions comes in the climax. Both Luffy and Sanji striving to accomplish their goals by 1 AM, each of them powered by the faith their crew has in them. Their 2-panel declaration beautifully parallels Usopp's speech to Robin aboard the sea train, imploring her to have faith in Luffy. There's honestly so much more to this arc in terms of inversions, but for the sake of time and for the sake of overflowing your brains with more information, we gotta press onward to Zou, Long Ring Long Land, Jaya, and Skypiea. Even the shortest New World arcs are amalgamations of 3 Paradise arcs, and Zou is no different here. First, the island itself is an inversion of Long Ring Long Land. Zou is really Zunatia, a nomadic elephant that wanders the seas seemingly without aim with a fantastical community of humanoid animals called minks living on its back. Long Ring Long Land is a circular chain of 10 islands. Paths between the islands only surface once a year, forcing the community of people living on the island to develop a nomadic culture. And Long Ring Long Land has its own set of interesting animals too. But Zou also pulls a lot of parallels from both Skypiea and Jaya. Oda calls Skypiea a wandering island once. Zou certainly fits that category, and both feature the ruins of ancient kingdoms. Specifically speaking, the flashbacks are the key here. Mont Blanc Noland and the great warrior Kalgara were fast friends, but their relationship was severed the moment Skypiea was knocked up into the sky. When Luffy rang the golden bell at the end of Skypiea, its ringing, colloquially referred to as the Song of the Island, not only signaled the end to the 400-year war, but it also reached and connected the ancestors of Noland and Kalgara, Cricket and Viper, respectively. On Zou, the elephant has been waiting to hear one voice, Momonosuke's. It begged him for an order to retaliate on the ships that were firing on his leg. Momo finally relented, and Zunatia defeated Jack, and so, by the law of inversion, you could say that the bell was asking the island's inhabitants permission to defeat Enel. Back to Noland and Kalgara for a moment, however. Their fast friendship is the complete antithesis of Dogstorm and Cat Vipers present on Zou. Each pair also deal with a devastating plague. Noland, a botanist and doctor, has to convince the natives that the plague isn't the wrath of God, and thanks to modern medicine, it's now a curable disease. Meanwhile, Chopper and the half of the Straw Hat crew that arrived on Zou have to convince the minks that they're here to help before crafting a cure for Caesar's special gas. Chopper's newfound skill with botany was specifically highlighted too in this arc. arc. Jaya's presence is most evident in the Mink King's first meeting with the samurai. Every single Mink on the island did whatever they could to keep Jack from knowing Raizo's whereabouts. They feigned ignorance, fought, and were nearly wiped out in the process, but held firm to their beliefs that it was a fight worth their lives. Luffy faced the opposite situation on Jaya. He and his crew were looking for information on traveling to Sky Island, and they were practically laughed out of the bar in Mocktown for believing in fairy tales. Luffy and Zoro were humiliated and beaten but never fought back. It wasn't a battle or an opponent that was worth their time, and upon exiting the bar, they stumble upon Blackbeard, who they didn't know at the time. He offered his respect and in a legendary spread declared that dreams will never end, a near total thematic inversion to the Mink's declaration that Raizo is safe. Moving on, it's time for Dressrosa. By now, even the speed readers should have noticed the parallels between Alabasta and Dressrosa.
They're the same picture.
From the kingdoms, to the princesses Vivi, Viola, and Rebecca, to the main villains of Doflamingo and Crocodile and their respective crews. We could add another 25 minutes to this video's runtime detailing all the callbacks present, but luckily for us, the entirety of the inversion can be eloquently summarized by these two panning spreads from episode 957 of the anime. The main difference between the two arcs is that Dressrosa is what would have happened had Crocodile succeeded in becoming the hero of Alabasta. Crocodile runs a secret organization and works in the shadows, while Doflamingo rules over a slimy underground trading ring and makes no real secret of it. Even their defeats are inversions. In Alabasta, Crocodile is defeated in a secret battle underground, punched through sheer bedrock until he's blasted into the sky, exposing him and his plot for the entire country to see. Meanwhile, in Dressrosa, Luffy only arrives in the scene after the entire country is chanting his name, and in a climactic clash, he casts Doflamingo out of the sky and back into the depths where he belongs, demolishing the ground below. And of course, Smoker is given full credit for taking down Crocodile so the world government can better cover up the events. Compare that with Admiral Fujitora making a very public apology to King Riku precisely so that the world government can't cover it up. But of course, there's plenty of callbacks to Jaya and Skypiea here as well. First, Doflamingo shares characteristics with Enel. Both are gods, one by birth, the other by self-appointment, each rule from the sky, but the most important thematic inversion is the presence of a natural enemy. Luffy is Enel's natural enemy because he is made of rubber, a perfect conductor to Enel's lightning. But as explained by Corazon in Law's flashback, the D-Clan are also known as God's natural enemy. God in this case means celestial dragon, so Luffy is also Doflamingo's natural enemy. Doflamingo's birdcage is even technically present in Skypiea, its Ohm's ordeal of iron. This is yet another example of Oda blending inversions across an arc. Doflamingo's devil fruit power is Shura's ordeal of string, the Tontata's Tabasco ball is the ordeal of balls, and the ordeal of swamp? Well, hold on to that thought for just a moment. Before we move on to Punk Hazard, I want to talk about Bellamy. Luffy's second battle with Bellamy mirrors his first, with Bellamy shifting his utter disgust to newfound respect for the young pirate. And as if to cement this theory, Luffy only throws one punch in each fight. He uses his right hand on Jaya and his left hand on Dressrosa. Next up, Punk Hazard. The first island the Straw Hats come across in the New World, Punk Hazard, is composed of inversions of the 3 islands they first encounter on the Grand Line. Before we get to Whiskey Peak, when Luffy and company first enter the Grand Line, they run into Laboon, a massive whale who is simultaneously treated by a doctor, Crocus, trying to help him find his adoptive family. And at the start of Punk Hazard, the crew enter the New World alongside a pod of whales that look like Laboon. They quite literally are with their family. Whiskey Peak was an island that had all sorts of visitors, as it was one of the first stops on the Grand Line. They roll out the welcome carpet to pirates that stop by and celebrate, hoping to lure them into a trap so the members of the Baroque Works can collect their bounties. Punk Hazard, on the other hand, does not exist on the log post. In fact, it was deemed uninhabitable and its residents exist in secret. Both arcs are centered around saving royalty and Princess Vivi and Momonosuke, each hiding their respective identities, and lastly, Punk Hazard makes no real secret of the overarching villain Doflamingo's involvement. He remains physically and verbally present throughout, while Crocodile remains shrouded in mystery during the build-up to the Alabasta arc. So how about Little Garden? That arc centered around an ancient duel between giants, Dory the Blue and Brogy the Red. They battled every day for 100 years and actually forgot the reason for their legendary fight. Punk Hazard, on the other hand, quite literally is shaped by the duel between two massive powers, Aokiji, which translates to blue pheasant, and Akainu, which means red dog. The reason for their duel is known globally. The winner would become Fleet Admiral of the Marines. Now, Aokiji and Akainu may not physically be present in Punk Hazard, but there are still 2 giants who live on the island. the Yeti Cool Brothers, a tag team group of assassins that show mastery of combat in the snow. Their footprints look eerily similar to the giant footprints shown before Luffy and co set foot on Little Garden. And a quick note on Smiley and Land of the Dead here. Land of the Dead in Japanese is Shino Kuni. The name and massive form evoke memories of the Island Eater, which in Japanese translates to Shima Kui. In its gaseous form, Land of the Dead petrifies its victims, trapping them in a hardened shell. The imagery it evokes is a perfect mirror to Mr. 3's candle service set, which is set up to kill Zoro, Nami, and Vivi on Little Garden by covering them in wax. It cascades over Punk Hazard like a raging avalanche, a perfect transition to Drum's many inversions. Let's talk doctors. Hiruru's dream is realized at the end of the Drum arc by Kureha, a massive display of pink dust-coating snow in the shape of a tree on the island. It lights up the sky and represents hope for a kingdom that truly needed it. Caesar, on the other hand, was incredibly jealous of Vegapunk to the point that he recklessly unleashes a prototype of his gaseous weapon that turned Punk Hazard into a wasteland. Both moments share the image of a mushroom cloud, but both carry opposing meanings to that imagery. And while the image of cherry blossoms might be inverted there, the message itself is inverted elsewhere. In projecting the pink dust into the sky, Kureha is sending off her adopted son Chopper with her blessing. The phrase she uses is, "Go on, you foolish boy." Thematically, that statement is the opposite of law-cutting Virgo and the entire island in half. He claims to have destroyed the proverbial gears, specifically stating that no one can turn back. One final note on this section that I thought was pretty cool. On the crew's way to Alabasta, Nami falls ill, but still managed to steer the crew clear of a massive typhoon. However, on their way to the New World, she's otherwise occupied taking a bath before the Sunny gets sucked into a massive white storm, an underwater typhoon. Alrighty, so we've covered a lot of material here. We've made it through both Paradise and the current parts of the New World, and the order of those arcs follow a very similar overarching pattern. The question now is, what about the East Blue? Does it follow the same order? The answer is no. Instead of getting Logtown's inverse prior to entering the New World, we get Arlong Park. It is ridiculously obvious that Fishman Island's primary inversion comes from Arlong Park. The current circumstances of Fishman Island were created by a single act of kindness from Whitebeard. He arrived on the island one day and declared that it was now his territory, saving the populace from poaching by pirate crews who passed through. This is a perfect inversion to Arlong, who arrived on the shores of Kokoyashi village and announced that it was now under his rule. Hody quite literally takes from Arlong, but he represents a total inversion of Arlong's character. Arlong actually dealt with and experienced human hatred towards Fishman. Hody simply absorbed the hatred without experiencing it himself. Both are the respective leaders of their movements, and both have an elevated berserker state that they attain in the final battle with Luffy, but each have very different priorities. When Luffy shields himself from an attack by using one of Arlong's men, Arlong is enraged and distraught at the thought of hurting one of his own. Hody shows no such moral compass, using a nearby ally to shield himself from one of Zoro's flying slashes. Again, there are numerous one-to-one inversions between both arcs, but this is where the theory really gets interesting. In order to make either the story more cohesive or because it felt appropriate, Oda took aspects from other story beats outside of just the main inverted arcs. In this case, Fishman Island happens to also be a natural inversion to Skypiea. One is in the sky, the other is underwater. The Straw Hats shoot up into the White Sea via the knock-up stream, while they get shot down into the depths of the pitch black ocean via the underwater waterfall. On the way back down from Skypiea, they encounter an octopus balloon that allows them to float easily downwards, and on the way down to Fishman Island, they run into a massive octopus that they have to tame, the Kraken. Several of the most impactful visual inversions of the entire series come in this arc, and really these visual choices were what initially sold me on this theory in the first place. Enel's Maxim is a weapon of mass destruction, completed by enslaving the populace. There's a beautiful shot towards the tail end of the story where a defeated Enel rides Maxim to the moon, and he gazes longingly at his end goal. Contrast that with Noah, a ship created centuries ago for a benevolent purpose and promise, now being used as a weapon. As it begins its descent towards Fishman Island, the arc is now massive in the foreground, a perfect inversion of the moonshot from Skypiea. Upon defeating Enel and ringing the bell for the very first time, Luffy's celebratory shadow is cast over the clouds, connecting the descendants of Mont Blanc Cricket and Kalgara and fulfilling a generations-long promise. Contrast that with Noah's first appearance over the sky in Fishman Island. A promise has not been kept, and instead of joy, King Neptune is struck with horror at its mere presence. And now, with Skypiea in the mix, Hody's inversion becomes a little clearer. He's a combination of both Arlong and Enel. Enel destroyed his homeland of Birka and traveled to Skypia. Hody is basically threatening to do the same. Both wield tridents that have superiority over Luffy in their respective battles due to his debilitating circumstances. Against Enel, Luffy had to fight the latter stages of the conflict with a massive golden ball attached to his arm. Against Hody, Luffy is inside a ball-shaped bubble that restricts his movements as well. If you've been subscribed for a while, you'll know I keep my balls in great shape thanks to my previous Manscaped partnership to keep my manly JoJo body in check. This time, however, we're back on the high seas with One Piece, and that means I'm gonna need some brand new equipment. Introducing the Lawnmower 4.0. Now fully waterproof, wireless, and featuring a brand new handy-dandy travel lock system to prevent battery drain on the move, I can set sail with renewed confidence in my perfectly sculpted man garden. If you remember the last time my Gumu Gumus were the topic of the day, you might recall I had pretty sensitive skin. Thankfully, the Lawnmower 4.0's new skin-safe tech is here to save the day once again. No cuts, smooth trimming, adjustable guards. I have total confidence here, and it is totally pain-free. One of the coolest new features, however, is the wireless charging system. Doubling as a handy stand for the mower, this thing charges fast and is great for up to 90 minutes on a full battery. It really is the full package for my package. So, if you're looking to find the right tools for your family jewels, head over to manscaped.com and use promo code NOTMARK20 for 20% off plus free international shipping. Your balls will thank you. If the flow of the East Blue inversions was the same as the Paradise inversions, we would naturally expect Baratie to show up before Fishman Island, but it doesn't. Instead, we get the Straw Hat Crew's version of Logtown. The place that was the beginning and end of Roger's life should of course be inverted by the death and rebirth of Luffy's crew. In each setting, the crew is only there for a short amount of time, and they get outside help to escape from the Marines. And in a poetic ending to this recap, the time skip begins the way the first half of this series ends, with Luffy picking up the hat that he had set down. Of course, that leaves us with a big question: where are the rest of the East Blue arcs? Where's Baratie, for example? Well, the answer might surprise you, and it's a massive manga spoiler, so for those who don't want to know, use the time codes below to skip ahead to my predictions for the remainder of the story. We're on the Baratie right now. Onigashima is Baratie. What better inversion of the seafaring restaurants shaped like a fish than an island held in the sky by flames created by a user of the fish fruit? Kaido echoes Krieg from their facial designs to their craftiness and their seemingly indestructible armor. Additionally, they are each in command of a massive pirate crew known for their numbers, and there's an interesting name that was most recently used in chapter 1014. As Luffy plummets from Onigashima, Kaido remarks that Luffy couldn't be Joy Boy either. The inversion here, on Baratie, Luffy earned a specific moniker for partially destroying the restaurant. The chefs on staff called him Chore Boy. Not only does it sound similar, but it also seems like it could potentially have an inverse relationship to Joy Boy. Luffy gets out of his Chore Boy duties by defeating Krieg, which means he'll likely fully realize his role as the carrier of Joy Boy's will by defeating Kaido and restoring Wano. And hey, remember Zeph's logbook? The one that we discussed in the beginning of this video? One that Krieg hypothesized contained information on the One Piece and its location? It too has an inversion. Oden's logbook, which now resides on Wano itself. How One Piece will end. And so that brings us up to date, to the end of the map and faced with forecasting what's to come over the horizon. Right now, we have 3 arcs left to invert: Romance Dawn, Orange Town, and Syrup Village. To be clear, before we jump into this, my theory is not that the events will take place in these locations, but that they will instead be inspired by them, and in many cases can be used to potentially predict future events. So, let's see what we can come up with here. Elbaf. In the current order of inversion for East Blue, we should expect Syrup Village's inversion arc to come immediately after Wano. The one island that seems to be on everyone's radar right now is Elbaf, and I think this theory supports this idea. The name of the island itself is an inversion of the word fable, which, if you think about it, makes complete sense as a thematic inversion to Syrup Village. If used as a verb, the term to fable means to tell fictitious tales, otherwise known as lies. And so it is my belief that Elbaf will come after Wano as an inversion for Syrup Village, which had to contend with Usopp's daily tall tales. What's more is that Usopp has wanted to travel to Elbaf since Little Garden, so there's little to no surprise that these arcs would be connected thematically. To speculate as to what might take place here is somewhat difficult to nail down, but given its significance for Usopp, I would wager he will play a leading role in the adventure that takes place. It could also very well be the location where, instead of his famous lies, he will be telling truths, creating that scene that we've all sort of predicted at one point or another, and present himself as the warrior of the sea he set out to one day become all those years ago. Another possibility this land may very well present to us is the long-awaited reuniting of Usopp and his father Yasopp. Syrup Village acted as the place where he saw his mom pass on and his father leave. Perhaps Elbaf will be the location where he'll connect with him once more. Undisclosed Location A. Next up, Orangetown, where we fittingly recruited Nami after dealing with a formidable Buggy the Clown. This one is still open to interpretation. There's a chance it could be Lodestar Island, Fulalead Island, packaged alongside Shelltown from Romance Dawn, or perhaps more likely, these separate islands I'm inverting in the East Blue might all be combined and be covered thematically on Elbaf, making Elbaf one of the final islands visited on this incredible voyage. So just keep in mind, the locations of the remaining material will be tenuous at best. It's honestly impossible to know how and when Oda will invert a pre-existing idea. With that said, however, piggybacking off of the possible reuniting of Usopp and his father, I think it's entirely possible that this will be an opportunity for Luffy to reunite with Shanks. For the majority of the story, Buggy the Clown and Shanks have been shown to have a shared history, and so, given that Buggy was a large part of Orangetown, it might be fitting that Shanks, the other half of their duo, will play his role in this material too. Perhaps they'll meet in Elbaf, and perhaps that location might explain why they call him Chief Shanks instead of the much more colloquially known moniker of Captain Shanks. And finally, I'll only be guessing in this situation, but given that Buggy's cannon played a large role in the initial story, instead of the cannon perhaps threatening the Straw Hats from some outside force, perhaps an inversion of that could lead us nicely into an endgame of the story, as Luffy and his crew instigate the attack instead, only this time it backfires on them. Undisclosed Location B. Let's talk Shelltown. Thematically, a self-promoting marine tyrant ruling by overt fear, Captain Morgan, has an easy inversion in the secretive ruler of the world government, Emu. Both of them are even shrouded in shadow as they're first introduced to the story. The structure of the island also bears a small resemblance to Marijoa, so perhaps we'll head there after Elbaf, who knows? It's difficult to discern whether or not the greatest battle in all of One Piece will take place here in this segment, or if it will be over the One Piece itself. We'll have to see how it all pans out, but regardless of what form it takes, we've been promised by Oda himself a fight to dwarf that of Marineford, which is a massively bold statement even for Oda. Undisclosed Location C. And that brings us to the end of the series with Fuchsia Village on Dawn Island, where it all began almost a quarter century ago, with a young man eager for friendship and adventure being denied entry to the crew while desperately trying to prove his value in any way he could, ultimately dragging a man he admired into life-threatening danger as a direct result of his own mistake. And so, what better way could this series end than by having that one-time child return home as king of the pirates, surrounded by his friends and crew without a single thing left to prove. He could attempt to give the straw hat back to Shanks too, but we could go one step further and predict that Shanks will say that the hat was never his, that it was always meant for Luffy to wear. The final conclusion of this theory is that One Piece will end with a complete inversion of the opening pages of the series, which details Roger's final words at Logtown. By then, the mystery will be solved, everyone will know what the One Piece is, only this time, unlike Roger, Luffy doesn't die alone. He gets to live on with his friends at his side, still having so much he wants to see and do in the world, and daring anyone else to come after him. And so, the very reason why Oda has had the last chapter clear in his mind from the very beginning of the series back in 1997 is because back in 1997, Oda had already written the first chapter. In other words, all he had to do was invert his already finished work. The One Piece. But okay, I can hear some of the gears turning in your brain. Where would the inversion of Laugh Tale be? Surely it has to be somewhere in the East Blue, right? Well, lucky for you, this theory has an answer. Or at least I think it does. It's Gaimon's Island. The island of misfit creatures where Gaimon, a man stuck in a treasure chest, spends his entire life unable to reach a series of 5 treasure chests on the top of a hill that happen to be empty. The inversion almost writes itself. We now know Laugh Tale houses the ultimate treasure, and Luffy will be the one to announce it to the world. A step further, and we could infer that Luffy's hat, the thing he always travels with, is an inversion to Gaimon's treasure chest, which means, in some way, shape, or form, Luffy's straw hat is in fact related to the One Piece or carries greater meaning with regards to the D clan. Of course, we can take this a step further. We now have seen the very moment Roger discovered the great treasure. Maybe there's an inversion in the first half of the Grand Line that can unveil it for us. Well, there is in fact a mirror to Roger's famous laugh at Laugh Tale. As we mentioned earlier, Oden's flashback is based in part around the Ace, Sabo, Luffy flashback. After Sabo's apparent death, Ace stares out across the ocean and cries. For a brief moment, the world had nothing to offer him. A stark contrast to Roger discovering everything the world had to offer. And that finally brings us to the ultimate purpose of inverting the narrative to this degree. Yes, it absolutely does show how much the story's characters have grown, but in reality, I believe it has more to do with the lingering will of D that exists in the background. Luffy and Blackbeard are written as polar opposites. Their scene together in the bar in Jaya proves this. They are inversions of one another, and the very moment that signifies, according to this theory, the middle of the story or the midpoint of the inversions, Marineford, ends at the lowest point of Luffy's life and the highest point in Blackbeard's, with him having slain Whitebeard and having claimed the era for himself. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding the will of D happens to be that of the checkered fate, with checkered typically meaning a pattern alternating between squares of lights and darks. Recently, throughout the New World, dawn has been referenced numerous times, and it seems to be correlated to one of Luffy's purposes in life, bringing light to those around him. Blackbeard, on the other hand, always brings death and destruction, with his signature power being that of darkness. The inversion of Blackbeard telling Luffy that dreams never end on Jaya was Dogstorm and Catviper telling the samurai that Raizo was safe. Dogstorm happens to be Lord of the Day, while Catviper is Lord of the Night on Zou. And along similar lines, Luffy is the dawn and Blackbeard is the dusk. They're both Ds, but their presence comes one after another. Luffy is there to build up what Blackbeard tears down. As Whitebeard says in his dying words, Blackbeard isn't the man Roger is waiting for. Blackbeard claims his era begins on Marineford, but in reality, he's misunderstanding his fated purpose for being there. He's ending Whitebeard's era and throwing everything into chaos. So now, Wano will be about Luffy starting a new era, the same way Roger did. By finding the One Piece, he will bring a new dawn to the world. Now, of course, this is what we had put together before Chapter 1018 was released. And so, now that we have some remarkable new information, let's take a look behind the scenes and revisit a couple of things so you can perhaps best understand how we try to digest and interpret this information. As usual, massive spoilers are incoming. Chapter 1018 reveals that there used to be a legendary warrior, a sun god called Nika. Slaves in ancient times would pray that he would come and save them, bringing laughter along the way. I don't think there's a soul on the face of the planet now that doesn't believe Luffy is in fact related in some way, shape, or form to this sun god character, and it only strengthens our assertion that Luffy will bring about the dawn of the world. It's also not a stretch to say that, based on the shadowy outline presented, Nika could in fact be Joy Boy himself. And last but not least, the design also harkens back to the Shandians, which is only natural because we know that the sun god was referenced several times throughout Skypiea, and that the world government targeted Shandora in the past, essentially wiping it out. So, if that's the case, that arc should be where we find our inversion for Joy Boy. We should expect a flashback detailing what happened in the Void Century to pull from the Nolan and Kalgara flashback on Skypiea, so let's take a look. The character of Kalgara himself could be a Joy Boy inversion of sorts. He's a dogmatic, serious man hell-bent on protecting his country under a strict religious doctrine. This already sounds like a great inversion to the very concept of Nika. There's even a line in the manga where, after Kalgara befriends Nolan, the fellow Shandian Icelandians remarked on how they never had seen Calgara laugh so loudly before, further implying his serious demeanor in the past. Additionally, Calgara has not seen the larger world and wants to hear all about Nolan's explorations, while Joy Boy is a figure who connected people around the world. Now, in that same breath, Nolan could be a stand-in for Roger. You see, both were executed after finding a mythical island. The world at large believed Roger left his great treasure at the end of the Grand Line, but he himself said that he was too early. While Nolan returned to Jaya too late, Shandia had already been rocketed up into the sky, not to be seen by him ever again, and as a result, everyone believed his tale concerning the City of Gold was a lie. He died in disgrace, hoping Calgara, his friend, was okay. Roger said that he wished he could have been born in Joy Boy's era, inferring that he wished he could have been friends with him. He was probably looking for the kind of friendship Nolan and Calgara had together. There are other elements that point to a potential inversion with the original Poseidon, namely the sacrificial altar where Calgara nearly forces his daughter to commit suicide. It's already somewhat implied that Joy Boy influenced Poseidon in a way that prevented her from using her powers the wrong way for some reason or another. But perhaps most interesting of all, looking at that flashback as guidance, we may be able to interpret what the One Piece may in fact be. Obviously, this is all speculative, but it's fun to see how far we can stretch this theory for potential answers, so let's give it a shot. The ancient city of Shandora could be inverted by the mysterious ancient kingdom. Shandora's treasure was the Golden Belfry, which generated a beautiful tone and provided light amidst the stormy seas. The sound of this bell ringing was always intended to connect people from the past to the present and eventually even the future. And it was specifically referenced as the song of the island throughout Skypia, even beyond that flashback. So what we're looking for now is a song. Surely there must be a song for Laugh Tale, something that would be the opposite of the bells ringing, something that didn't disappear and exists in the hearts and minds of people across the world, connecting them on their journeys. We thought long and hard about this, and really only one song fit that billing. The song for Laugh Tale is Binks' Sake. The lyrics are the key here, namely 3 verses. The first, if you lose your nerve, this breath could be your last. But if you hold on, the morning sun will rise. With the next verse ending with, waving our goodbyes, we'll never meet again, but don't look so down, for tomorrow night the moon will also rise. The song literally details our analysis of the Will of D's Checkered Fate, and even more than that, the final verse specifically states, never ending, ever wandering, our funny traveling tale. That last bit untranslated is Warai Banashi, which literally means laugh tale. Roger was the one who named the final island, and if our theory is correct, he likely named it that because of this song. They sang it all the way there through stormy seas, just like Nolan heard the great bells ringing on his way to Jaya. So, is that the treasure? I mean, it's important to remember that the world at large are the ones who coined the term One Piece, not Roger or Joy Boy himself. And if there's one thing this series has taught us, it's that treasure is always in the eye of the beholder. There might not be anything better for Joy Boy, a man who loves to make people smile, than a song that will withstand the test of time and bring joy to all who hear it. Maybe there's a version written on the island that has lyrics detailing the specifics of Joy Boy's story. Not to mention, it would be a great payoff for how hellbent Luffy was on recruiting a musician. Or maybe we should now look at the bell itself for a potential inversion. Calgara said that the gold wasn't as important as the information written on the poneglyph, so perhaps in this case we are looking for something physical. What is the inversion of a bell? Well, how about we literally just rotate it and suddenly it looks like a cup. A cup to store Binks' sake, to be passed amongst your friends. What else has Luffy been doing at the end of every arc other than celebrating with all of his friends? What better way to end a long journey than with another magnificent celebration to end all celebrations? This time with the whole world, with everyone free to love and laugh as much as they want. It would also have close ties to Western mythology, Luffy finally attaining the holy grail of this series. Now, obviously there are a few holes in this theory, with one being that it doesn't explain why Roger felt he was too early. I mean, perhaps to Roger that celebration couldn't happen with fishmen and other races harshly treated across the world. And so perhaps it's a celebration the entire world needs to partake in. But hey, that's just a theory. An anime theory. This has been one hell of a journey. The fact that there's this much nuance in a story that has been meticulously crafted over the past quarter century is mind-boggling, and to be clear, there's definitely a chance that this theory's prediction is wrong. I mean, there are even East Blue inversions in Wano proper, but even with that in mind, Oda has had no qualms about inverting earlier scenes multiple times. Remember how NL traveling up to the moon was inverted visually by Noah falling into Fishman Island? I mean, that scene is actually inverted again in Reverie when Shirahoshi finally gets a chance to see the sun as the fishmen travel up to Marijoa. It is definitely possible that the ending of this series will go in a completely different direction never seen before. It is also possible that inversions will continue to pull from earlier arcs, merging and painting them in a very different light as we have outlined above. I mean, the very nature of Oda's inversions makes it impossibly difficult to predict everything that will come up. I mean, who could have predicted that Fat Water Luffy from Alabasta would be an inversion of Gear 4? My own One Piece journey, which spanned 6 months of 2020, brought with it many ups and downs and unexpected turns, but by far the best aspect of that adventure I embarked on, that I've mentioned time and again whenever asked, was the community that participated in the videos and the creative, talented individuals that became known as my One Piece Secret Service. Without them, not only would that series not have been nearly as good as it was, but I would never in a million years have come across this theory. This theory is very much the brainchild of one specific person, and her name is Rachel. This theory and idea is the product of countless rereads of the series and her love of the franchise. And so, this is where you guys come in. I think we've really got something on our hands with this theory personally, and if One Piece has taught me anything, it's that no matter how passionate and talented someone is, they will need help from their friends to reach their goal. And so, this is where I hand this theory over to you, the One Piece community. Together, there's a possibility that with this theory and the combined effort of the wider One Piece community, we just might be able to identify the inversions that will lead us to the One Piece treasure. I think we're looking in the right place personally, we just need a little help. Below in the description of this video, you'll find a link to a text document that Rachel herself wrote. It's very long and contains far more inversions I didn't even mention in this video, detailing the inversions concerning events that haven't yet even been adapted by the manga. And so if you feel like diving into this theory a bit more and perhaps discovering for yourself some inversions that even we missed, I encourage you to check it out. One Piece is a series that keeps giving, and this video has been one of the most rewarding and fun projects to work on. I want to again extend a massive thank you to Rachel for effectively writing this video for me and discovering this theory. And so, her social media links are also in the description. Be sure to send her some love and a follow. She's amazing. But for now, I leave this theory in your hands. Personally, I think there's too much to this theory for it to be just a coincidence, and perhaps out there watching this video right now is a person who, using this theory, could piece together more answers from it. But until then, I've been Totally Not Mark. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.